Wild Colonial Boy an Irish song?
Yeah.
I've been trying to think of these songs everywhere we go through that country. So in Austria it was Edelweiss, Edelweiss. And in England it was what was it now?
It was so annoying. Something about bobbies and Tower of Big.
That's right, yeah. The Tower of Big Ben and the lonely red cheeks of the children.
Don't know that one.
Showing my age now.
And what's the one for Ireland?
Well, I was thinking of the Wild Colonial Boy.
It's we used to sing it in school in Australia. When I was a kid, my dad had this live recording album of the Furies. I love it.
There's a great stuff there, it's called Grace. Great. So great.
The Lonesome Boatman, I remember that was good. Do you guys know the Furies?
Yeah.
The flute and the Steal Away song.
Yeah.
And he had an intro to the to the song and the meaning of it. Yeah, I heard it so many times. I knew every word. Yeah.
And you're an Irish export.
Kenya.
Yeah. Senator William
I think Wild Colonial Boy probably resonates more with the Irish roots.
Was such a good singer.
What was that?
Like, you're such a good singer.
Not yet. There's too much grief in this still. Yeah, no. There was a time there was a good singer. Like I was a good other things too. But coming back to sort of knock around my singing quite a lot. And my art. Quite a lot.
She's a very good artist. It's very good drawing.
But it's not good around it. Okay, I wanted to focus on a particular thing now, which is, you know how earlier we were discussing a lot about certain emotions from childhood affecting the sin and certain emotions from childhood not being able to be accessed, and you know, and when we were talking with you, Charlotte, you remember we were talking about the habits that you developed as a child to avoid emotion, but we also then raised this issue of the bigger issue, which is really the spiritual belief associated with faith, which is the bigger reason why we do things. And I wanted to, something we started talking about in
Portugal.
I think even right at the beginning, I think we might have mentioned it even in Dublin. There is this whole area of looking at 4 areas of your life to identify your problems. So we wrote down the 4 areas in a lot of these different places we have done. So let's write them down here on the right-hand side of the book. Spiritual. Mary and I always get our lefts and rights mixed up.
Which has been very funny when we're navigating all these new cities.
Mary goes, turn left, and I'm going, right.
Yeah.
No, right, no, left.
No. Are you blaming that all on me? Sometimes it's you.
No, it's me. I get it mixed up as you do. Emotion. It's funny when you're left-handed because you're sort of like, everybody is used to right-handed things, and so you start sometimes thinking that left is right.
We're both left-handed.
We're both left-handers. You've got these 4 areas of your life, right? And a lot of people believe, and you know, we have talked to groups of people a lot about emotion, haven't we? In different presentations. If you look through our presentations on our website, you notice there's quite a few of them about emotion. And we have talked a bit about sexual things as well. Not a lot. Recently we've done so in the last couple of years at home, but because most of those recordings have never been published, most of you haven't heard our discussions about sexual matters. And we've talked a fair bit about physical things like, you know, physical addictions, for example. But actually most of our problems don't come from these things. from these bottom three things, they actually come from these spiritual attitudes we have developed in the course of our life. And we started to talk to the group in Luton, not Luton, that's where we're heading. Linton, sorry, in England, about the whole idea of working your way through a spiritual principle. You remember that? Those of you who might have been there, we started talking about that with Perry, the man Perry, and he had raised some sexual issues he wanted to work through, and we were talking to him about it being actually not a sexual issue but a spiritual problem, right, based on spiritual principles. And what we find when talking with most people, that when we start talking about these things, the group sort of livens up a bit, becomes a bit more engaged, has a bit more understanding generally of the emotion, because each of you have emotion, right? So it's easy to understand emotion. Most of you haven't suppressed your sexual desires completely yet, and so you still have those, and you still obviously live a physical life. So these things we often mention quite a lot, and of course the way we experience many of these things here is through our sensory apparatus, our touch, taste, smell, all the senses of your physical body. Your spirit body has more senses, and you experience other things through those senses. Your spirit body also has a wider sensory apparatus in each case too. So, for example, on Earth, you've got a visible spectrum of light between infrared and ultraviolet, just on, in that range. But actually, as a spirit, you can see more light and therefore more colours than you would see on Earth. And so each one of your bodies has a, you could say, the physical body has the most limitations, and your spirit body has less limitations, and then your soul, of course, has the least amount of limitations of all things. And by soul, I mean not just your half, I mean the two halves combined. Now, in this equation, generally when we talk about problems, problems we're facing, sins we're facing, and so forth, generally most people think that their problems revolve around these things they're doing, right, in those areas there. So their emotions, you could say their desires, emotions, their sexual feelings, and their physical desires and physical needs. And that's where most people believe most of their sins are, right? And they also believe that's where most of their important sins are as well, in terms of priority. But actually, from God's perspective, the biggest sins you commit, and also the ones that have the biggest effect on your life, are the spiritual sins you commit, not these. Not the emotional ones or the sexual ones or the physical ones. And in fact, your spiritual development in principles is going to be the greatest, or lack of it, is going to be the greatest help or impediment to your progress. And so it's important that we talk about this with you so that you can learn to identify principles as spiritual principles, rather than keep saying, I've got an emotion for a child and that's why I do something. The main reason why we sin has nothing to do with your childhood, right? And if you think about it, as we've already explained about the first human couple, a woman and a man, they were sinless, sin-free. They didn't have a childhood of damage, and yet they still chose to sin, even though they were perfect. They were created as perfect natural human, just like you were, and they were put on the earth different to you. They weren't born. They were created and placed on the earth by God. And they had, when that happened, at the very first point, they had no knowledge, just like a child would have no knowledge, but they were in an adult body, and they had adult development of the brain, and they had clarity in that regard. But it was their very first experience of life, just like a baby's very first experience of life. And instead of having the opportunity to grow into it like a baby would, they were just put into it, like very first couple. And even though they were perfect and created perfect, they chose sin. Now God, of course, knew they would, or foreknew that somebody would, with regard. And he knew, of course, that probably the very first ones would. So he created a whole series of laws that govern your recovery from sin, the process of letting go of sin. He created a whole heap of laws so that you, even if you did engage sin, you would be able to recover from it. So that's very good that God did that, because if there weren't any laws that had aided you in recovery, it'd be very, very hard to recover from sin. Right? But all of those laws are firstly based around spiritual principles, not emotions or sexual desires or physical things. Now, of course, there are spiritual principles that govern your emotion, and there's spiritual principles that govern your sexual desires, and there's spiritual principles that even should govern your physical life. But if you focus on spiritual principles, you'll find you'll solve not only the principle, but many problems here in this area of your life, all at the same time. And so when I see people so focused on worrying about their emotion, worrying about these kind of things, it actually can be, if you're not careful, a distraction from what really matters in terms of your progress. Right? Now, every spiritual principle also has the highest hierarchy when it comes to law. So if you think about law, the way God created laws is there's laws that sort of govern. So you could say a group of laws that govern the physical, right? And those laws, from God's perspective, have less penalties associated with them than the laws that govern, a group of laws that govern the sexual areas of your life. They are of higher priority, right? And then they are less, from God's perspective, in terms of importance, as the laws that govern your emotional state. Does that make sense? So each set of laws, so here we're talking about a hierarchical system of law that starts at the bottom being the lowest laws, and then as you go up towards the spiritual laws, or the spiritual principles that govern all laws, they have the highest priority. So if you solve a sin that's a spiritual sin, you also solve many of the reasons why you sin in the lower parts of the hierarchy. Right? Now, we've already seen a couple of examples of this that you may not have noticed. You remember when we were talking to you, wasn't it, about your abortion? Yeah. What was your name, sorry? Magella, that's right. And so we're talking to Magella about abortion, and remember she was focused on like feeling the guilt, if you like, of the sin, which is certainly what needs to be done because that's part of paying the penalty of the sin. But we said to focus on the cause. Now, there's also a hierarchy of causes. So they start at the physical level. So you think about physical causes like, I don't know if I have enough money to look after this child. Might be a physical cause. And then sexual cause. I had sex with a man without thinking about the consequence, right? Sexual cause. Emotional cause. I don't know emotionally whether I can handle bringing up a child by myself in the society I'm living in. Emotional cause. But all of those things are justified or governed primarily by spiritual causes, right? And that's to do with spiritual principles associated with love, truth, responsibility, and so forth. Now, in 2016, we did a series of assistance groups, and the last group in 2016, the last two groups, were in, I think, November of that year, and we called it God's Loving Laws. And some of you were even there, right, at that group. There was a group called God's Loving Laws, and in that group, we talked about the principles that govern all laws. Now, the beauty of solving things from a principle perspective on an emotional layer is, when I say an emotional layer, what I mean is the solution to a spiritual perspective has to also be emotional. Remember we said earlier, the truth has to be emotionally felt in order to be experienced. But we're saying the emotional feeling of the spiritual law will govern your choices for the most degree. Less than any other thing that you experience. So you might have some physical addictions or sexual addictions or emotional addictions, but if you have some spiritual addictions, they are the ones that are going to cause you the most damage in your life. The hierarchy demands it, actually, if you think about it. The hierarchy of law demands that the thing that God views as the highest thing is going to have the most effect. And if you solve the problems associated with the highest thing, it also makes sense that you'll solve more of your problems faster. Right? So bearing that in mind, right, you can see that it's good to focus attention on the spiritual rather than trying to focus your attention just on the physical, sexual or emotional experiences you've had. So we want to focus our attention on the spiritual matters of life. Now, somebody asked in Demo, I think it was, what is a spiritual aspect of life? And I said it was anything related to spiritual is anything related to principles associated with love. Principles associated with love. And people go, and this has often been the case when we raise the issue, they go, this all sounds very sort of theoretical. Like, how does that sort of help me in my practical life? Like, it's now sounding like it's like some kind of spiritual, more like mumbo jumbo, rather than some practical thing that's going to solve problems for me in my day-to-day life. But actually, when you think about it, every law is God's basically enforcement of his standard of love. So if God's standard of love is such that the spiritual principles are highest, and I bring my spiritual principles in association, or I work on the spiritual principles in association with the standard of love that God has, can you see I will automatically start resolving these lesser problems? That makes sense to everyone? I'll automatically start working through these lesser problems because, see, for most of us, these problems, the way we've arranged our life is that these problems are number one and these are number two. In other words, for most of us, if you've got an emotional bad feeling or you've got a sexual bad feeling or even physical discomfort or whatever, they are the things we focus on first. And then if we've got enough time left over, we then look at these, if we even think of doing it. But you see, once we start solving some of these, we go, I'm more comfortable now. And there's a higher tendency, once these are solved, if this isn't solved, that you just leave them alone and you don't even touch them. Right? But these are the ones that cause most of our sin. So they're driving our future behaviour, these spiritual principles that are out of harmony with love. That makes sense so far? Yes, want to ask?
Yes, so then you can see like the spiritual point is kind of the cause of it. And the other ones are more like symptoms.
Almost, yes. There are times, aren't there, when we've got other problems here which are, you could say, quite strong causes. Like an example of that is I'm terrified of emotion. That might be, so that's an emotional thing that I'm struck. But why am I terrified of emotion? It's because I have some beliefs about emotion that are faulty. And that they are all spiritual beliefs, you see. So yes, it is very true that these spiritual beliefs are actually the cause of most of our problems. And these are mostly effects of the spiritual belief being enacted in our day-to-day life. We take actions in harmony with those beliefs. Yep. Anyone else? Questions so far? Because we want to discuss this and sort of put it into practical context, if you like. Okay. So up to now, everyone's fine with this? That spiritual principles associated with love, if you have the wrong principles, therefore a distortion of what you believe love to be, then naturally that's going to affect your behaviour in every aspect of your life. It's going to establish spiritual beliefs that are false, and then as a consequence of the false spiritual belief, it's going to trigger emotions or cause you to act in emotions or sexual behaviour or physical behaviour that is also sinful, because the belief is false. Yeah? So, Charlotte?
So what's the difference between a false belief coming from fear and the spiritual false belief?
Well, the false belief coming from fear is actually an emotionally based belief. It's not a spiritual one, right? Spiritual one is actually a false faith. It's a corrupt faith. And remember we said we did a system group in 2019. Unfortunately, the sound wasn't very good and we're still trying to work on it. But in there we talked about faith, and we talked about faith being the motivator for all of your decisions and actions. So if my faith, so faith is a spiritual belief, and if my faith is corrupted, I have a corrupt faith, then that is going to drive my action. If I have a true faith, or you could call it a loving faith, rather than a corrupt one, or a true faith, a faith based on the truth as God knows it to be, then that's going to drive my loving actions. My corrupt faith will drive my unloving actions, and my true faith will drive my loving actions. Right? Now, this quality of faith then becomes a very important quality, because your faith, there are some aspects to your faith. Some aspects of your faith include desire. Where you have your faith is what you end up desiring. Make sense? Where you have your faith, that's what you end up longing for. Right? Where you have your faith, that's where you put your passion. You know, your motivation is in where you have your faith.
It's where you spend your time as well.
It's where you spend all your time. It's where you also put your energy and your effort. It's going to be towards the thing you have faith in. So, a physical example of that. In Australia, in times past, the average person was told from a child that if you own your own house, you have a higher level of self-sufficiency than you do if you don't own your own house and you rent it. Now, this began in the 1930s during the Depression. And during the Depression, all the people who were renting houses were eventually kicked out of their homes, and there was so much homelessness that a lot of people remember that time with heaps of fear. A lot of older people remember that time with heaps of fear. So they decided that the best thing they possibly could ever do is eventually own their own house so they could never be kicked out of it again. Yeah, make sense? So you can see their faith was, if I don't own my own house, I'll be kicked out of it. Their faith was, if I own my own home, I will never be kicked out of it. So that's their faith. So what did it cause them to do?
Work hard.
Work hard, save up, and it became an Australian, like, sort of right that almost every Australian now, during this period of time from the after the Second World War right the way through to sort of early 2000s, it became this feeling that it's a right to own your own home. And almost every single person in Australia was working towards owning their own home, right? They put all their energy into owning their own home. They put all their time into owning their own home. It was coming from a sort of corrupted faith that if I don't own my own home, I could get kicked out of it. And if I do own my own home, that's a great thing. So it's just a physical layer of faith, but it is eventually a spiritual belief, isn't it? In the sense that you're basically saying, I can't be pushed around. My will can't be pushed around if I own my own home. Now, of course, anybody now who thinks about that would go, well, the reality is if you don't pay your taxes, you end up not owning your own home, whether you own one or not, right? So, not really true, but it's what they believed, right? And as a result, they put all their time, all their energy, all their motivation, work hard, so to own their own home. And once most people own their own home, they sort of feel like, now I can relax.
I'm secure.
I'm secure. So the corrupted faith is security is owning a home, right? And not really, is it? Because many people in life have been owning their own home and weren't very secure. And of course, if the government decides to go to war or something like that, well, good luck with that idea of owning your own home. The next day it might be obliterated by a bomb, you know. So it's not really true, but it is a truth that they felt emotionally, but also believed emotionally as a spiritual belief, right? So they believed it to be true, and as a result motivated their desire to actually do it. And in the process of coming to own their own home, most of them worked most of their life, paid money to a bank, they borrowed huge amounts of funds, paid money to a bank. Of course, many, by doing that, lost their home to the bank and all sorts of things, right? And then of course, there was also, once they got to a stage where they felt, now I can relax, right? I own my own home. By that stage, many of them were so old they could no longer enjoy their home, right? Because now they couldn't even care for themselves, many. And so they end up losing their home or selling their home to have a smaller home so they could pay for carers and all those kind of things. But these are all the consequences, you could say, of the corrupted faith not really being faced at an emotional level, and so never being released, and so then motivating a desire that drove physical behaviour. Make sense to you? Yeah. So the principle is, the corrupt faith, the faith that's out of harmony with love, will drive any behaviour, including the creation of imaginary spiritual beliefs, as well as the creation of emotions to support those beliefs, as well as the sexual desires being influenced, as well as physical actions, and if it's corrupted, it will drive sin. It'll be the main motivator of sin. But if it's true, it'll be the opposite of that. It'll be the main motivator of you becoming a loving person. Make sense? So, do we understand the principle so far? Yeah. Good. For your questions? Back there. Keep your hand up, so that.
I'm not sure I understand the principle correctly.
Yeah.
But for example, if I was a child,
Yeah.
and my spirituality or connection to God arose from the fact that one parent was absent,
Yeah.
and the other one, I really didn't like their presence because of the many methods they
They
used
used.
on me.
Yeah.
Yes. So would it mean like this was my corrupt faith? So I didn't really form a connection with God to form a connection, but to escape or find a parent who would actually be loving, understanding.
Yeah. Be like, not like your mum and dad.
Yeah.
Not like a parent that absents himself, and not like a parent that bosses you around and belittles you, but someone different. So there becomes a corruption that says, this is what I want God to be.
So it's out of need. So every action I take, emotional, sexual, and physical, would most likely in my life be out of need.
Correct.
Okay, that sounds like me.
Correct.
Yeah.
And to be honest, it probably sounds like everyone on earth, really, doesn't it? Yeah. Correct. And this is the thing, people do not even understand that even their concept of God is driving some of their corrupt behaviour when it comes to sin. Now, an example of that is, if I've got a concept of God that, so maybe I might flip this over now. If I've got a concept of God, just a very simple concept of God, that God will rescue me. Right? Just a very simple concept. And that can come from a corruption in faith that began in childhood where nobody rescued you. Or it could also come from the opposite. It could come from everybody, every time you had a problem, mum and dad rescued you. So oftentimes, in childhood, let's say this is me in childhood, and I had one of two things happen. One was I got rescued all the time by others, or I was never rescued and I really like to have it, right? In other words, I'm avoiding the emotion that I was never rescued. So I end up with a feeling of rescue me that develops from never having had it, right? So when I'm rescued by others, I end up developing a feeling that I expect to be rescued from every thing I did. And then if I have this concept where I wasn't ever rescued, I would like someone to come along and rescue me once in a while at least. And I will actually measure that as love. You follow me?
So you're basically saying in both those scenarios there's a demand to be rescued.
Correct. So now
it's actually an angry state, isn't it?
There's an angry state that develops in me that is a spiritual state. I expect rescue, but it goes further than that. It goes love.
Rescue is love.
Rescue is love. That is now a spiritual principle inside of me.
Because I've defined love.
I've now defined love falsely, so I've corrupted God's truth about love. I've defined it falsely, and this is a feeling inside of me, remember? So it's not just a thought, it's a feeling I have. This is what love does. Love rescues me. Now, it gets even more interesting, because let's say the person who rescued me was my mother, but not my father. So now it's women should rescue me. Women who love me rescue me. You follow? So now it's even more nuanced, because now it hasn't just a general feeling that anybody's going to rescue me. Now it's specifically a gender is going to rescue me. That makes sense to you? And it's still a principle of love that is completely corrupt. So,
I just
on the chin?
okay. I just get a little bit confused, because if this is with God and you have faith, because actually I had this problem one time, because I had so much faith that God would protect my son, and when he was attacked, I lost my belief in God for a couple of years, and I had to work hard to get it back.
That's right, yeah.
So is it unloving to have faith that God will rescue us, or?
Well, it's loving to have a corrupt faith.
It's unloving. Because what we're describing here is actually corrupt faith. Because this state is, remember, it's an angry demand that rather than me be responsible, I will be rescued. So that is an unloving.
And also unloving in your case to believe that your son should be rescued from his own issues or from yours?
It was a horrible spirit attack.
Yep. So, what age?
In this age, he was probably 16, but he has a brain injury. Very,
Yep. So she's damaged in the brain?
Yeah.
He
was born with a serious brain.
With an intellectual disability?
Yeah.
Yep. So in that case, it's mostly mum and dad that is going to affect this decision now.
Mm.
So when you say to God, rescue my son from something that I am causing, God's going to go, but hang on a sec. If I rescue your son from something you're causing, then you're not going to see that you're causing it.
I know I caused it, but but still I just had faith that is it unloving to have faith in God protecting us?
That's a corrupt faith.
Yes.
It's not in harmony with love. That's what I'm saying. It's corrupted. It's corrupted. You can see why. You feel sorry for your son and you feel like, oh, it's terrible that it's happening to him, and there's a whole lot of guilt associated with it. You might not want to feel either. And also, most people struggle to understand why a spirit attack might occur. So they go, well, just God, can you sort it out for me? But the trouble is, God's not going to sort out something that comes from a corruption in you.
Mm.
So he won't do that, because that breaks the laws of love about self-responsibility.
I hear you. I can't emotionally.
Correct, because
not yet.
there's a corruption from childhood.
Yeah. I'm happy. Because I've been pondering about this actually.
Yeah. So, and this is also, when you think about it, when you didn't get your requirement met, caused you to no longer have any faith for a while, which is indicative that the original faith didn't really exist.
Okay.
And therefore it must have been corrupt.
Yeah.
Right? Because a faith that's actually real stays permanent. It's a permanent thing that you have. It doesn't change.
What are you now saying? If I have a real faith now, I am protected.
Just give me the protection.
Yeah, that's right. And can you see the feeling is, no, there must be a corruption still, right?
You know, God's laws are always acting to keep you safe.
Yeah, I feel that.
But if you act in disharmony with the law,
The purpose is to
God's
correct.
laws are acting to correct you. And God's laws are acting on the same way on other people, but God never controls the free will of others. So you can pray to God for protection, but if you are outside of God's law, God will want to highlight that. God won't overcome your sin in order to take away a consequence, if you like. And then when there's a consequence, some people go, oh, why didn't you protect me, God? God's saying, I was showing you the consequence. But also, even if you're completely in harmony with God's laws, other people may act outside of those laws, and God won't restrict their will. If you're inside of the law, God will do many, many things to help to protect you, to give you warnings, to bring you people who might intervene, to do all these things. But ultimately, God can't take away the free will choices of others, because that would negate the whole design of us incarnating and learning how to use our will.
Yes, I've been thinking so much front and back about this, because I felt so many times that actually God did protect me, because I should have been dead in this situation. I should have been dead there.
Yeah.
And I actually got protection, so I felt so safe.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But then you got to also be very careful, don't you, in that you do dangerous things in order to, and think God's going to protect me.
I did probably do something dangerous, but it was loving, because I was stopping one very unloving healer that was doing unloving stuff, and I stopped it because
Well, I wouldn't call that dangerous.
It was very
It'd be in
dangerous.
harmony with the law and not dangerous.
No, but it felt the consequence was dangerous then. It stopped me from fighting for the right things, because for a while, because I was scared for a new attack. So, yeah.
Yeah, but that's a different corrupt faith. Now,
That's right. Yeah.
you see,
Right, it's complicated.
well, yeah, see, most people don't realise that they go from one corrupt faith to another corrupt faith to another corrupt faith in the course of a conversation, which is what you've just done.
Yeah.
3 different corrupt faiths, bang, 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 in a row, justifying certain behaviour and certain actions and so forth. And this is what we do. And this is what we're trying to illustrate to you, actually, is that we go from one explanation to another explanation to another explanation and so forth, and we just go there because the corrupt faith leads us there, because the purpose of corrupt faith is to be able to continue a sin without actually solving it or addressing it.
If you think about your example, you were like, God will protect me. You felt like, I have this faith, God will protect me. And then something happened with your son and you were like, God, that you didn't protect me. I give up on you, God. Not saying, oh, maybe there's something I need to learn. Maybe there's a correction.
Maybe there's a corruption of my faith on this issue.
Yeah. Which then indicates there was a demand in your corrupt faith, in the faith you thought that you had.
Which automatically means there's a corruption.
It's not probably, definitely.
Yeah.
You wouldn't give it up if you didn't.
Wouldn't angrily give it up.
Yeah, it's an act of anger to sort of give up on God, reject God, rather than to be corrected.
Yeah.
So we just need to talk to God about this.
Well, firstly, it's about understanding is that when the faith or when the principle is corrupted versus when the principle is actually in harmony with love. And this is where we see most people make some very large mistakes in their life. They hear a principle like love, and then they think it means their version of love. And when they hear another principle called truth, they think that means their version of truth. Now, if you look at the average version of truth, what is it? It's like, well, you tell the truth when you're forced to. Other than that, you shut up pretty much most of the time if you can. And you try to be as conciliatory as much as possible. And also you try to tone it down as much as you possibly can because most people don't like hearing it. And that's the average, corrupted version of truth. You know, the corruption of the principle. Right? Now, of course, that's not God's standard. That's your standard. Or you could say, if we get right down to it, the hellish standard on earth, actually. Right? So a lot of these corruptions are actually corruptions that are in such a low standard that it's why the earth is in the state that it currently is and why people on earth are in the state they are, because there's so much corruption that the standard is very, very low. And because everyone has faith in that standard, they continue acting in the manners that they do because they have faith in the standard. So if we look at some fundamental principles, let's start with the principle of love. What is love? What are the sub-aspects of love? Okay. What do you reckon they are? Compassion. Sorry? Kindness.
Giving.
Gifting, yes, giving.
Generosity, I was going to say.
Generosity. Whoops, 2 eyes there, but you know what it is. Generosity.
Patience.
Generosity, that's not how you spell it. You can see it, I didn't go to school. I did. And what was patience?
Understanding, grace,
Understanding.
acceptance,
Giving them faster than I can write them.
Grace.
Grace. What was the other one that was said?
acceptance,
Acceptance.
respect,
Respect.
Creativity and responsibility.
Yeah, well, there's a lot more than this, isn't there, involved in love. But let's. I'm at the end of my board, so. So you could say these are what you would classify as how we understand love to be. It's going to be these things, and love is going to involve all of these things. Now, bear in mind, here we're talking about feelings, right? Which are very different than actions or words or thoughts. So it's one thing to act in a kind manner. So in England, it was really interesting. you bump somebody in the supermarket going, oh, sorry, I'm sorry. And the feeling sometimes is, get out of my way, but the polite thing to say is sorry. So to say sorry. Or the feeling is, oh, I'm afraid now, someone might be angry with me. So the polite thing to say, are you gonna hit me now because I hit you? And instead of going, instead of saying that, which is not very polite, they'd rather go, I'm sorry, like pleading with you that you don't punch them in the nose, almost. And so, the feeling is not often in alignment with what we're describing the emotion to be in words, right? So what we need to do is learn how to have these feelings to people, which is very, very different than the words or the actions that we might take, in the sense that if the feeling is there, then there'll be less corruption about the action that's taken afterwards, right? So, love involves these things as feelings. So, when we talk about love, the average person goes, oh yeah, I get what love is, and they list these things and more, but as you easily did, right? You could list another probably 10, 15 things, right? At least the average person can, right? But your mum said she loved you. And many of you do believe your mum still does love you. But how many times did you get some of those feelings from her? How many times? Like, oftentimes, hardly at all, right? Yeah. So, she's saying, I love you. She's saying, I'm your mum, of course I love you. which is often an angry feeling, right? Rather than one of these. Don't you know I love you? Don't you get I love you? All that kind of stuff. All right? Rather than a feeling for you. Now, in this feeling, there will be different things going on, but also, you see, this is what many of you believe love to be, but there's also a number of other things involved in love that most of you haven't listed that you probably will never get to list, given, for many of you, the feelings you have about love. Things like being direct, being straight, being transparent, being open, being straight down the line, not making compromise. They are actually all God's version of love.
Having a strong line. Actually,
strong line in the sand.
What is love and what is not.
Yeah, and when a person crosses the line, instant. You cross the line. Consequence of crossing the line. See, many of you feel that if you cross a line, a person who has compassion and kindness for you will let you cross the line. Yeah? They'll let you get away with it. But that's love. That's what love would do.
That's compassion.
That's what compassion is, letting you get away with it. But God doesn't let you get away with a single thing. And God is the pinnacle of love. And yet you don't get away with a single thing. And many of you won't know that, perhaps until you pass and you get to see the list of things that God hasn't let you get away with. You go, what? God didn't let me get away with that? Like, what's wrong with God? That's the general feeling. Is God should, like, my expectation of love is like compassion, kindness, giving. But I'm not listing all the rest of the qualities. Most of us actually hardly even know them or understand them. And then because we're not feeling God, we can't feel that God's quite definite about those things being a part of the love as well. And so what we do is we think, this is what love is, and so this is my version. And then when everybody seems compassionate, so when I say, I've got this addiction, everyone feels compassion for it. It's like, yeah, you poor person having that addiction. Does God feel any compassion for any of your addictions? He actually doesn't. If you can feel what God feels about your addictions, he doesn't like them. Because he knows they cause most of your pain and suffering, and all the pain and suffering you cause others by using them, are coming from your addiction. So he knows they're not good for you, right? And yet you're going, the person who loves me will have compassion for my addiction. So this is why a lot of times people end up setting up relationships with spirits rather than God. Because they have a spirit that goes, yes, that addiction, you poor person. You know, you got that addiction. So in my case, like I used to have the addiction of pleasing the woman all the time, right? So that was my addiction. And so, you poor person. You know, the spirits were going, you poor person. I go, oh, this is God. You know, God's loving me now, you know, thinking I'm a poor person having that addiction. But God, I feel God, God's going, get rid of that thing, son. That's a problem. If you're causing problems in your relationships, you're causing problems in your life, you need to get rid of it, you know. And I'm going, oh, he doesn't love me. That one doesn't love me. And then I start going, I'm looking for a God who loves me. Right? I'm looking for someone who loves me in the way that I expect love to be, right? That's what I'm looking for. So you can see how a corrupted faith about a principle drives a lot of my action, right? So I'm going to, in that case, I'm going to go, like, love is compassion, love is kindness. And if I got it from my mum and not so much from my dad, then I'm going to say, a woman who loves me feels sorry for me when I have the addiction of pleasing her. How complicated is my life now? So, I'm going to be looking for women who can have compassion for me, being in an addiction of pleasing them. Now, do you think that's the kind of woman I'm going to attract? Like, no, because if I have a desire to please the woman, I'm going to attract angry women, probably want to boss me around. And then I'm going to feel less and less like I'm being loved by that woman. And so I'm going to be very prone to search for another woman who I feel is more understanding and compassionate and understands me and gets me. And what do you think I'm going to do with my sexual things then? I'm going, I feel really sexually attracted to her. She's my soulmate. Yeah. And not understand it. It's all driven by the fact that I have a corrupted faith in what love actually is. So love is some of these things, right? Is many of these things. But it also is a lot of other things that I don't want to know about. Love is firm. It's uncompromising. Right? These are things we don't want to think love is. Right? And we could list a whole heap of things there as well that God's version of love actually is, but our version of love has some severe corruptions. We now have corrupted faith about what love is. Right? And so when somebody acts towards me firmly, how dare they? It's like, they don't love me. They think they love me. They tell me they love me. They don't love me. Right? And if I have an expectation that this is what is love and not this, can you see I'm also going to be very prone to getting angry with them. You're not loving me now. You're not compassionate for my problem. You're not kind to me now. You know, you'll get upset with them. And this happens, of course, all the time. Because we have a corrupted faith about what the principle is. You follow? Corrupted faith about the principle. Now, if I did other principles like truth, we could make the same list, couldn't we? Many of you could list what truth is, and it will all be nicey, right? Of what you expect truth to be. And then there'll be a whole heap of things that God says truth is, that you're going, eh? No, that's not it, right? And so the trouble is that a lot of our decisions we then make are going to be based around the corruptions we have, right? And we're going to act in ways that we feel completely justified in acting because our corrupted faith in the principle says this is what it is. And we're going to feel completely justified in when somebody is uncompromising with me, we're going to go, they're lacking compassion. How do you know they're lacking compassion? If you can't feel them, how do you know they're lacking compassion? right? Compassion is a feeling, and if you can't feel that feeling, how do you know they're lacking it, right? And if you expect compassion when you break law, then your expectations are totally in error, right? If you expect it by continuing to break law and having a desire to break law, and then somebody will be compassionate with you every single time, surely a person in their right mind will say, "You're continuing to break the law. Don't you think that's stupid?" Because you're going to get a bad result from continuing to break it, right? A person who loves you will tell you it's stupid. He won't tell you, "Oh, don't worry about it so much. Have a try next time." You know what I mean? All those kind of things. He will say, "Look, it is what it is." And the love is firm and uncompromising like that. It is down the line. God's love is down the line. There are only a few times when there's the law of love will bend. Well, not bend, it doesn't bend, but the law of love changes its operation when there's other things done, which include things like repentance. Repentance engages the law of love in such a way that further compassion can be given, right? Than what not normally be given. Grace can be given than what might not normally be given. See, most people in the spirit world are still breaking law, and there's no grace given. There's no, what do they call it? Quarter allowed, or quarter, I don't know. Old sayings, but there's no allowance for it, and the only time that there is any further compassion shown is when, and grace given to the person, is when they've engaged a part of the law which says to experience full compassion, repentance must be required.
But it's still, the compassion is still there, isn't it? Yep. But the law, it's like before we repent, the law is trying to bring us to the line of love. Yep. And when we're in a state of repentance, we're saying, I want to meet that line and go even further. And so then that there can be less consequence because we've already gone that way ourselves.
Less force by the law.
Yeah, that's what I mean. There's less
you're
force.
Already going in the direction the law demands.
It's like before that you're pushing against where the law's trying to bring you, if this is the line of love. You're trying to push back and the law's trying to bring you to this line. And when you repent, you run towards the line and go beyond it. And so the law doesn't need to keep pushing, and so it feels like there's less consequence then.
Yeah. All right, so let's come across here and answer some questions.
So when you think about being in temper tantrums, instead of going to the real cause of the pain, concentrating on the corrupt pain, if you have an emotion, and you're like, I'm going to feel my emotion, and you're not actually getting anywhere, you can have some thought about how is this connecting to what is the pain?
What's the belief in that?
The belief.
Correct.
Yes, the spiritual belief around this emotion.
Correct.
And then you can start to maybe get out of that temper tantrum phase. And get more you spend less time, because actually I felt I've spent a lot of time in that temper tantrum. I'm feeling like I'm doing something, but actually I'm not.
That's right.
Because my spiritual perspectives aren't changing, and then none of the latter ones are changing either.
Exactly.
So I need to change the focus, or you myself, I need to meditate more about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Gold star, yes. Do the thing. Right, that is very true. And you end up in tantrums because you don't want to deal with the corrupt faith, the spiritual way that you're trying to break the law.
Yeah.
You end up and you can spend a lot of time and waste a lot of energy and think, why aren't I changing? Why aren't I accessing this feeling? And it's because there's these beliefs.
Remember, the corrupt faith creates expectations that are all unloving. So if you don't address the corrupt faith, you have expectations that are unloving. Yeah. Now, of course, what can help me too is learning about what love is from God's perspective rather than your own. That can help, can't it? It's sort of okay, love is all those things, and all of you found those easy to list. But I never heard one thing about it being firm or uncompromising, not one. Right? And yet they are what love is. right? So can you see there is obviously corruption in what the version of love is? And you can see why the corruption exists, can't you? Because whenever somebody feels firm and immovable with many of you, you go, oh, you know, like, I can't push the person around, right? And these things tell me that I think just by listing these parts of the quality, that they tell me I should be able to push them around a bit. You know, if a person has compassion for me, they'll let me get away with things, right? Interestingly, God has compassion for you. In fact, He has the most compassion for you than anybody else on earth has, and yet He doesn't let you get away with anything. So His version of love, very different to yours.
It's sort of like, isn't it, sometimes when I'm talking to someone and I say, oh, you missed the mark of love there. You missed something there that wasn't loving. You know, sometimes when I'm working with people or they're trying to help me do something, say, oh, you missed the mark there. And then when we make an excuse and say, oh, that was because I was a bit stressed, or I just had an interaction with someone.
Or I was a bit upset.
That's us really saying, there should be a dispensation for me missing the mark of love. And we must be doing that all the time in our lives, you know, and that's showing that God's love is not like that. God's like, you missed the mark of love, and you missed it.
And there's a penalty.
There's a penalty.
Straight
There's
away.
things to deal with so that you don't miss the mark next time.
Yeah. So we were at next, and then over here, straight behind.
So this also obviously affects how our own worth, how I love myself, how I don't love myself, because of what I've been imbued with.
Correct. A lot of people feel that for them to experience love, they've got to get it from someone else. But actually, there's a whole heap of things about love of self here that we need to also bear in mind. Love of self is compassionate with the self, while at the same time being firm and uncompromising with self. And it's kind to yourself, while at the same time recognising times when you need to repent. It's also giving to yourself as much as it give to someone else. So this is where a lot of people set up this sort of problem that they feel like they love others so much that they're tired. They can become tired. And I used to do that. Like I was working, at one point in my life I was working 3 days a week. I was going out knocking on people's doors, talking about truth I thought at the time, and doing that 3 days a week. And on top of that, having a family to care for. And on top of that, being an elder looking after a congregation of 120 people and having 5 talks with those people every week. And I thought that was love. But where was love of me? It was like, none. And so I got to the stage where I was 33 and I was exhausted, which tells me there's a problem with my corruption about love. You follow? Yeah? So these principles apply to you as much as they apply to someone else. So if I take that on board and I go, right, who's going to have compassion for me? Well, the very first person who should have compassion for me is me. Because if I don't have compassion for me, how can I expect you to have compassion for me? Right? And who's going to be firm with me? Well, the very first person who should be firm with me is me. Not needing it from somebody else. I should be doing it. If I was in harmony with love and I love myself, that's what I would do. And like when I'm avoiding repentance, well, if I love myself, I wouldn't avoid it. I would engage it because it's helping me. It's a love of me to get rid of my stuff, right? And when it comes to being generous, are you generous to me? Am I generous to me? I need to learn how to be generous to me before I can be generous to you, right? So what about patience? Am I patient with myself? Or just every time I face a problem, I beat myself over the head about the problem. Because, would I go up to Mary and go, well, probably not, right? Unless I'm abusive. And then of course you go, well, I'm patient with Mary, but not with me. So that's a problem, right? Because it means I don't understand love. I've got a corrupt faith about what it means to love myself in comparison to loving another. Of course, if I really love, there'll be this very strong sense inside of me of equality. Is that I'm equal to you, right? So if I don't feel like I'm equal to you, then it means I've got a problem, not you. Like, you might think I'm weak and insipid and stupid, but at the end of the day, if I feel I'm equal to you, that won't bother me. But what a lot of people do instead of that, they go, oh, that person just thinks I'm weak and stupid and whatever. You know, I'm getting angry with them because they're not loving to me. They're not caring about me. But I'm not caring about me either, because if I cared about me, I wouldn't take it on board. I wouldn't take this crap from others, knowing that it's out of harmony with love. You follow?
Yeah, I finally feel I'm making steps towards repentance. But what I've been watching is the old habit of having been shamed, shaming myself and blaming myself.
Yeah.
And I'm having to do a lot of work with this, with compassion for myself and some self-forgiveness.
But still being firm with yourself,
yes.
Not letting yourself get away with it, while at the same time being compassionate that this is where you come, this is how it come about, where did you get it from, all that stuff, right? And this is what I notice for most people. Even when we talk about the quality of love, most people do not understand what we're talking about. Because they make this list when in their own head about love, and they neglect the rest of love in the process. You follow? And then they make this list in comparison about love of what others should do for them, but don't make the same list of what they should do for others. Right? And then they make this list for others, but not for them. You see, and we end up in this space where we're not being honest with ourselves, not being truthful with ourselves about what's really going on. Because we've got so many problems in the sense of equality with another, expectations of others, and we've got so many problems with how we define love to be versus how we experience love in our childhood. And these large problems we face ended up with a corrupt faith even about what we think love is. And that corruption is going to drive a lot of my sinful behaviour. You can see that, can't you? You can see that if I don't have compassion for myself, what am I going to expect? Mary must have compassion for me. You must have compassion for me. And the reality is that no one has to have anything for me at all, from God's perspective.
That's a part of love.
That's free will.
When I love, I have no demand on anyone.
Correct. No demands at all. So here I am, because of my corrupt faith, placing demands upon others, which is a measure of the corruption. Right? And the corruption is causing me to make demands of others that are sinful. We're putting pressure on them and pushing them in directions because we don't want to come to a different version of love that's God's version. We want to hold on to our spiritual principle about love. Our principle, you could say, is not very principled. You're right? Because we apply sometimes compassion to others, but usually our friends or people who've been nice to us. And then people who've been unkind to us, we have no compassion at all. Right? But then compassion is not going to cause me to compromise my firmness. So oftentimes I go, oh, I'm compassionate, and the person did that. Oh, I'll let them get away with that. I'll let them do that again. I'll let them do that again, and again, and again, and again. And this is how huge compromises occur in like relationships, where you let the partner get, he's leaving his clothes all over the floor and you're tidying him up after him all the time, and you say nothing because you go, I have kindness for him. But that's only your idea of love. God's idea of love, you also need to have firmness and uncompromising about his unloving behaviour.
But don't you also come to feel that kindness is firm and firm is kindness?
Correct.
Really?
You start to understand that.
You understand how they're parts of each other, actually.
Yeah. So the big problem we face, and this is something worth doing as an exercise, is to write down the primary qualities that we've talked about, such as love, truth, humility, faith, and then try to define them for yourself as to what you think they are, and then put that aside, and then try to connect to God and find out from God what He thinks they are. Right? And it's a very interesting exercise, and if you're very humble with that exercise, so probably the very first quality you might need to start with is humble in order to do the rest of the exercise. And if you're very humble with that exercise, you will find there's a lot of discrepancy between what you expect from, in terms of the principle, and what God's principle actually is.
So really what you're saying is there's this corruption in what we believe the principles are that we should live by if we're even aspiring to be a loving person.
Yep.
And until we deal with those corruptions, we're not going to be in harmony with God's laws.
No, it's impossible to be, right? So imagine for a moment that I rub out this, rub out this, rub out this, rub out this, and I leave the rest in. Right? And that is my version of love, and nothing else. What am I going to do? Can you see? I'm going to put compassion over firmness. So I'm going to think, if I'm firm, I'm not compassionate anymore. Because that's not necessarily true. There's many times with spirits in particular, Mary and I are very firm with them when we're helping them. And we can also at the same time express our compassion for them. And there are many times you will find when you meet a celestial spirit, they'll do exactly the same. That when they're firm with an issue with you, but at the same time compassionate for how that issue came about. Right? But they are also uncompromising. They're saying, no, it's an issue and you need to deal with it. Not, skip over it, take a bit extra time, it's too hard for you to deal with right now, emotionally I can't cope with dealing with it right now. None of that. They're not saying any of that to you. God's not saying any of that to you. That's this saying that to you in preference of seeing the rest of love, right? Which actually doesn't say any of that at all, right? And in fact, it's not true compassion unless there's firmness attached to it. It's not true kindness unless there's an uncompromising attitude about it. There's not true giving unless you give to yourself as well as others. It's not true. It's not real yet. And it's not God's definition of love yet until you do both things. That makes sense, doesn't it? Right? So if I can do that, work that out, and at least start to have some intellectual concept that begins my emotional exploration of what I believe a quality to be, now I have some capacity to solve a lot of my problems. Because remember, most of my problems, as we said here, are caused by spiritual principles not being adhered to, being broken. So instead of my life focusing on solving these problems, I switch the priority of the solution of problems to the spiritual always number one, then the rest will come about as a result. Yep.
So I guess would obviously help then when I'm becoming conscious of a belief, asking God, is this corrupt? For a yes or no answer.
Yeah.
Which will help me become more transparent with myself.
Correct. And if you're open to the conscience, of course, but that requires humility.
Yeah.
So you can see, that's why I recommended the very first quality you start looking at is humility, what that actually means, because that's going to help you a lot, right, to recognise it in yourself. You've got to be able to recognise it in yourself. Once you recognise it in yourself, you'll recognise it in another very easily as well. So then you can make some progress on the other qualities, right? So my suggestion, these are not the only qualities, by the way, to look at. These are the qualities I would begin with. I would begin with humility, Then I would go to faith, what that is. Then I'd go to truth, what that is. And then I'd go to love, what that is. Right? Most people want to start with love. Because it's all about somebody loving them. Yeah. Which is obviously also part of the reason why they don't really understand love. Yeah. So the beauty of focusing on the principles of what they actually mean from God's perspective, not from your own, is that eventually you'll discover a lot also about God's personality. Right? Because if you think of every law that God has ever created is actually an expression of what he likes. So therefore it's an expression of his personality. So he likes compassion. He loves it. He also loves firmness. Right? He also loves kindness. He also loves uncompromising on the law. He also loves generosity. He also loves repentance. This is why God responds to repentance, because he loves it. The reason why he loves it is you're going to progress a lot faster now when you're in a state of repentance. When you're in a state where the law has to bash you into submission, you're obviously going to progress very slowly. But if you can repent and you work through your issues, you're going to go very much more quickly.
It's more energy efficient.
It's more energy efficient, yeah. He loves, by the way, part of love is economy. Right? So a lot of people go, oh, if I love myself, I'll get myself a big mansion, I'll get myself a newest car, and I'll get myself... But actually, God's version is economy is a part of love. So me doing all of those things, getting myself the big house and the big car and the big everything, is going to cause me to sacrifice a lot of issues of love to get it. It's also going to cause a lot of degradation to the environment where I'm not loving that. All I really need on earth is what I need. I don't need much more than what I need. Right? What we all really need in terms of survival is good fresh air to breathe, which is becoming a problem, right, in a lot of countries. Good clean water to drink, which is almost a problem in every country now. Like we're travelling at the hardest problem we have travelling is clean water, drinking clean water. We find, I don't know about you, but you drink bad water and it's like, I don't feel like drinking. Yeah. You drink good water, it's like, whoa, I'll have some more of this. It's good stuff. Right? So you're also liven up when you do in harmony with love as well. So good water, good air, good water, good food, obviously food, and some shelter so that, in different countries obviously, most of you come from colder countries than we do, you're going to need a fair bit more shelter than we do to live there. Right? So you're going to need shelter that protects you in the winter in particular here. In Australia it's like winter, what's that? So not much protection required in winter, but in summer we need protection where it gets very, very hot to the point, sometimes in my childhood I lived to places that are up to 50 degrees sometimes Celsius. It's like you can barely breathe the air with it that hot. And it's very uncomfortable. And anything above your own body temperature, you lose it, you're actually dying as well. Like anything below your body temperature, too much is dying as well. So of course you've got to keep yourself in that range, right? So they're all physical things you're going to have to do, but you don't need a mansion to do it. You just need to be very economical and logical in the way that you do it, right? That's a part of love. Love of the environment, love of each other, making sure that the earth's resources spread around to everybody, not just to me, right? Is a part of love of others, right? Part of this aspect of love. So what I suggest you start there, and there's interesting too, the spiritual principle of action, which we did also. What does it mean to take action? Because sometimes it means to do nothing. So that's an interesting thing.
To not agree.
To not agree, to not go along. Yeah. Sometimes it means to, like there was one of our sisters in Australia. She was going 40 kilometres every day, each way, into town 3 days a week to do the gym. So that's, what is it? That's 80 times 3. It's 240 kilometres every week to do the gym. Now, I calculated for her how much CO2 she was emitting in the atmosphere to do the gym. But it's kilograms of it every week, CO2 in the atmosphere. And then I asked her, well, does that sound to you to be loving to the environment? Wouldn't it be better to even, if you need a gym, make a home gym? Or get a collective of you around the same place and make a gym for you, where all of you can go. That would be, you still need to be healthy, and I understand in day-to-day life, many people don't get out in the field and work, which we find to be the most healthiest activity in terms of keeping healthy. And many people, when you're in winter here, it's pretty hard to do that, right, too. Everything's iced up and frozen in different countries, so you can't really do that, so you might need a gym. But at the end of the day, it's not very economical for the whole environment for you to travel, like, to the next country in some places in Europe to go to the gym in terms of that distance, right? Now, Kate, who's now in the spirit world, thought about that. She goes, okay, what is my corrupt faith driving my expression to look after myself here? Because obviously, to consider travelling 240 kilometres every week just to go to the gym, there's got to be some corruption in the faith, right? And it was a corruption of, this is looking after myself. This is what it means to love myself. There was a sacrifice of the environment for the sake of love of self, which love does not actually do, right? So she changed her yoga. She actually made a little home gym inside of her house. And after she did it a few weeks, she found herself enjoying it. And then after that, she found herself not only enjoying it, but thinking, this is great, why didn't I think about that before? And also, she was thinking, I'm now saving half a tank of fuel every week, besides also helping the environment and all these other things.
And right before she passed, actually, she told me, I'm fitter and I lost more weight than all the time.
Then all the time she went to the gym. Because every time she was going to the gym, she'd get a cup of coffee as well. But... Okay, now, where were we? We were...
Over here we were.
We were here, so now it's
Jean had her hand up there.
Who?
Jean.
Jean, that's right.
Did you go to Jean?
No, not yet.
I didn't see you.
Oh, sorry. Over here.
No, here.
Talia. We didn't go to Jean.
Who did you go to over here?
No, just the hands that are up. So the ones that are up, we're going to get it. Yeah. And Talia.
Does this then, does this help us then put God first in our lives?
Yeah, see, when you become very focused on the principle and understanding the principle, and then asking God about what is this principle really, and what does it really mean? Not my version of what it means, but God's version of what it means. And you start putting the information you're getting through God's before what you believe, right? Now can you see you're also prioritising your relationship with God over your own beliefs, over your own feelings, over your own emotions, over your own desires, right? And this is very beneficial because what God has in plan or store for you is far better than what you have in plan or store for yourself. Right? Even though many of us think that's not true, that is true. Right? And so in doing this, in making these changes emotionally, what you're doing is you're now putting some importance and actually you're acknowledging God's authority as the lawmaker over your own life. In addition, it has the other benefit, and that is you're learning about what God likes. And therefore, you're learning about God's nature, his personality, what he enjoys versus what he does not enjoy. You're learning about how God feels about things. And then if you become more open, you'll start to feel what God feels about things. But you see, if your feelings about love are almost like polar opposite of God's, can you see you're not going to feel God very well? Because every one of your feelings say, That's not what God should be. That's not what God should be. So in the case of this, every one of my feelings say, God should be compassionate, God should be kind, God should be giving. He should do this all the time. So when I ask for something, he should give it to me. You know, many children have that view, don't they? I ask my mum and dad for something. Where is it? You know, why isn't it here now? Right? So if I know that God's not going to do that, and that God's version of love isn't to give to you without there being consideration of others or the environment or anything else, and also consideration of your emotional condition and what it's going to do to you if he gives it to you, if you understand all that, you start understanding, God cares about me and my future far more than I realise. Like, if I had gotten the things in my past that I'd asked for, I'd be in a terrible condition right now. Because there were times in my life when I wanted a new car, a new house. I wanted 20 houses. I thought self-sufficiency, 20 houses, 20 rents, I wouldn't have to work. I think, isn't that wonderful? God thinks, that's terrible. Like, if you can feel God's feelings, you go, that's terrible that you think you shouldn't have to work. You know, you shouldn't have to get out and dig some holes. That's terrible. How's the environment going to be fixed if nobody digs any holes? Right? Parts and stuff. Like, God feels a lot of what we think are good for us as quite bad for us. Right? And once you start understanding how God views love, you start getting that. You start going, if I'd gotten all those things that I'd asked for, thinking that if God's giving me things all the time, then he loves me. And if I'd gotten everything I asked for, can you see I would actually be quite a dark, like demanding character if I got everything I asked for, right? And that applies to pretty much everyone, right? So if God had given me what I thought I wanted and thought I could demand and thought that a loving God would give me if I asked, and if God was giving me that, can you see how disharmonious that is with God's version of love? Yeah. So this is the thing. It's very important to come to terms with this. Like, what are the qualities, particularly the major qualities? And we can, in the assistance group in 2016, I think we organized, it was 17 or 18 qualities. I can't quite remember.
17, I think. 17,
I think it was, that we listed, principles that we listed. And some of those principles relate only to the human soul, and other principles relate to everything in the universe. And if we go through those principles and just try to understand them emotionally ourselves, and then understand what is my version compared to what is God's version, can you see, if I can contrast those things and develop my true faith, not my corrupt faith, by making myself come into alignment with God's version, then if I'm in alignment with God's version on principles, I won't need any law. I'll be automatically loving in everything I do if I am emotionally in alignment with those principles. Now, of course, receiving God's love has principles associated with it. So one of the things I need to learn, what are those principles? Right? What does it mean to be repentant? What does it mean to be awakened to my sin? There are principles involved there that I need to know so that I can make this process easier. Right? But again, if I focus on the principle and not my version, it's good to note my version. Very important, I feel, to know your version of the principle. But also try to find out what God's version is. Right? Through the process of the conscience, through what you see happening in the law around you, what's happened in your own life. Like, when you were asking God to give you things, like, did he give you them? So that means he didn't want to give them. Otherwise he would have given them, right?
Or he didn't want to give them under the terms you were asking for them, is a better way of saying it.
Yeah, but it's still the same thing, isn't it? He didn't want to do it. He didn't want to give you what you're asking for. Yeah. And so if I am in the stage where I expect things and and God's not giving them, and I think I'm praying for them and I'm not getting them, then it means God didn't want to give them, because God gives you straight away the things that he feels he wants to give you, and he does it immediately. And as long as you are sincere in your desire about it, he will give that thing to you, as long as that thing that you're asking for is loving. So either the thing you're asking for is not loving, or he doesn't want to give it because of your lack of desire, or there must be some other problem that you haven't yet discovered that has caused him not to give it. Because he wants to give you whatever you need, as long as it is a loving requirement, a loving ask, a sincere desire. Right? He wants to do it. So whenever we don't get it, we have to go, I wasn't that sincere with that, right? Obviously, and that means I need to do more work in understanding what love is, or I need to do more work in understanding what truth is, or whatever the quality is, that I'm working on. The things that I pray for the most are nothing to do with anything physical. They're to do with getting a better grasp on these qualities. Because I know I get a better grasp on these qualities, everything physical will change. Everything sexual will change. Everything emotional will change. So that's why I focused on this. Yeah. I forget to you.
Yeah, I feel, I grew up, my father was there was no God.
There was no
God.
God,
But
yes.
he was very angry at God, and God didn't exist because his family all died in the Holocaust. So I grew up with that.
Yeah.
But I always felt there's a God and there's something, like as a child, but I never had I don't remember having any connection with God.
Yep.
But I felt that this life can never end, and there's something.
Yep.
But I do feel I have a little bit of a corrupt faith that I can speak to God.
That you can speak to God.
Yeah.
Yep.
So after the talks in Portugal, I tried a bit, and I felt I mostly just feel, and I don't know if it's my own, or I just feel a little bit of love. I feel love, but I know that God's love wouldn't be so, so I'm judging myself a lot around this thing. And
when you say feel a little bit of, why wouldn't you feel a little bit of love? I'm just curious.
No, I would feel a little bit of love, but I'm wondering, is that God's love? Is that my love?
So you're worried that it might not be God's?
Yeah,
Okay.
because you said that divine love is like
overwhelming.
And
I'm not overwhelmed, it's just a little bit.
It's just a little bit. But I have a strong desire to.
It's interesting what you term love too, because the Spirit who gave you the feeling is not giving you love, they're giving you approval. But that's something we need to probably mention.
Yeah.
Okay.
So why would the Spirit giving you approval? What's the Spirit really saying to you? He's saying, this is a good thing you're doing. Trying to have this connection with God is a good thing. But the reason why he's being gentle about it is he doesn't want you to have the feeling that it is God. He wants you to understand that it's the Spirit trying to just encourage you to do more of that until you have the connection with God. Okay. Understand?
Yeah.
Yep. Get far away.
So, so I was wondering, because I know that you were saying that with God it's emotional.
Yeah.
Would it also be because it seems like you have also a real conversation, your hearings, it's not, or is it mostly emotional, or would there be words?
It's all emotional.
Emotion, feelings.
Yeah. Inside the human brain, though, it does trigger thoughts. Okay. So when I say the human brain, I'm referring to your spirit body. When you have emotions in the soul, it will trigger thoughts in your spirit body, which, if you allow them, will enter your brain, and you'll be able to basically hear what God's saying in terms of words. But it's your own process that's happening. It's coming from God as feelings. Okay. Overpowering, oftentimes, feelings. Yeah. So you notice with me, when you ask me a question, sometimes I get so passionate, and sometimes I do talk very fast. And a lot of it is because there's all this information coming at such a speed that I'm struggling to keep up with it a lot of times, and so and I get a bit feeling of limitation with words, as Mary knows, because sometimes I go, no, that's not the word, that's not the word either, that's not the word either. But you know, there's certain words that I can feel God intends even me to say in terms of, but as feelings, it's all feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I feel another thing that's kind of hard for me, and I know we spoke about like God's qualities, but like I have this, and maybe it's not possible, but what does He look like? What is it? Like but maybe it's not something that we can grasp, or maybe it's not even important. But
let's address it though, shall we?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why do we need to think what He looks like? Can you think why you might want to see what He looks like versus what He feels like?
I feel that I understand what He feels. I feel what it feels. I feel a little bit, but I also want to, because if you want to speak to somebody, I want to know what Mary looked like. It's
yeah,
so
but tell you, just go rewind a little bit.
Yeah.
I asked you the question and you're not answering it. So why would you rather see rather than feel?
Intellect.
Well, it's not just that, is it? There's reasons why. You know, your eyes are a sense of your body, right? And there are soul senses which allow you to see God, actually, but they are based on, all your soul senses work based on feelings, actually. So you can't even see something you can't feel. So when you're in a pure soul space, you won't even be able to see the thing that you can't feel, right? That's how the soul's been designed. But there's things you can see in your physical body that if that sense isn't honed, the soul sense isn't honed, you then make interpretations based on what you see, right?
It's sort of like you were saying, when you talk to me, you can see what I look like, what I'm wearing, what the look is on my face, and then the words that I say.
Yeah.
But actually, between you and I, there's this whole other thing going on all the time that we're around each other.
There's this thing
around our
happening,
feelings.
right, that you can't see.
Yeah.
That's actually going on. The thing you can't see going on is actually feelings coming from a person that you are not able to feel. Does that make sense?
So he's behind there, he's totally doing it like he's telling me.
I should have had that one thing, right? Now, the biggest problem we have as humans is we believe what we see and what we hear are the main parts of an interaction. Right? But actually the main parts of the interaction are emotional. Many of you don't realise that the way you act upon your addictions is all emotional, and then you speak, and then you do things and act, and then you hear things and act upon those, and then you want certain things sexually and so forth. But they're all based upon this, what's going on an emotional level. And most people have no idea what's actually going on at their emotional level, because as I illustrated behind the board, we would rather see the person expressing themselves, because because when we're sensorily dominant, we interpret from what the person is expressing their feelings. But the reason why we do it is because we're not really feeling their feelings. And we need the voice inflection and the action and the face and the body language and everything in order to interpret, because we're not actually yet really feeling. That's why we do it. And that's why we need to see eyeball God. You know what I mean?
Get a reading off this character.
Yeah, get a reading of him. Right. Now, God knows that what you see is very much able to be distorted. Any of you who've done any perspection exercises, many of you have done that, perspective, exercises, would know that, right? There's huge amounts of perspective distortion with what a person sees, even with your eyes. Yeah? And there's the old thing where draw circles and put lines through them, and which one's longer and all that thing, and you get to see that actually what your eyes see is really what your brain is interpreting, and therefore very inaccurate at times, right? And of course what your brain interprets is dependent upon what you're emotionally allowing to pass from your senses to your brain as well. Right? And that's a whole separate discussion in itself. So God knows that the most powerful way of interacting with any person, any soul, any person, is by feeling them.
And then actually, now it makes sense to me that I would, if I don't see, I'll feel much more.
Yeah, not only that, eyesight is dependent upon light, and therefore only at the speed of light. Right? Feelings are not dependent upon the speed of light. God's designed them that they can actually exit the universe and enter God, and exit God and enter you. So they actually are capable of going beyond the reaches of the universe instantly. They are not bound by space and time. Feelings. And this is a scientific, accurately truth. They're not bound by space and time. And so because of that, God can be present in your life without God having to be here to be present in your life.
But then I'm curious, just what, I don't have to see. I just want to know, but again, maybe that's what is it?
The main way you're going to come to know God is discovering more and more and more of his personality and nature through principles, through the basic principles of how God feels. So the way you get to know God is by feeling what God feels. And he wants to tell you what he feels. And that's what receiving his love is, right? Telling you what he feels is the conscience, and feeling what he feels, particularly for you, is going to be the love. Right? And actually, to understand God, you're going to need to have more love, more of God's love. Because the human soul in its normal condition, the perfect natural man, can't understand God at all. You talk to any six-sphere spirit, they will not be able to understand God. They have a concept, an intellectual construct regarding God, but they don't understand God's feelings, God's nature, God's passions, desires, none of that. They don't have any concept of that. And then on top of that, because there's so many things that are dependent upon God's love to understand the other things, they don't understand those things either. So every six-sphere spirit investigates areas of interest to the point where they can't understand it anymore. And then they just go, I can't understand it anymore, let's go for another area of interest. And then investigate that until they can't understand it anymore. And then another area of interest when that fails, when they've gone as far as they can go there. And with God's, because God's infinite and God's love is infinite, you can continue to understand things beyond what the human would ever be capable of understanding without receiving God's love. And in fact, you can't enter the celestial kingdom without doing that. Right? So this feeling process with God is very important to your blissful future. Yeah. Now, one reason why a lot of people do not want to feel is because inside of themselves there's a lot of hard feelings. And every hard feeling you have is like a restriction, it's like a prison on your feelings. So what God's trying to do as a part of these principles is not only does he want you to feel love, he wants you to ever grow in the feeling of love. So you might feel it first just a little bit, and you feel compassion and what that feels like, you feel kindness, what that feels like, and so forth. You start feeling the qualities associated with love, but you don't feel the power of those qualities. You don't feel how powerful you can become in expressing those qualities, right? And God wants that experience for you as well. So you can grow in the expression towards the infinite is what God wishes for you, right? Not just be a finite being with limited emotional capacity. So one of the reasons why God's way involves emotion is because God wants to stretch the hell out of you emotionally. Literally stretch the hell out of you. Does that make sense? Like, inside of us, we have all these hellish emotions, and God wants to stretch those emotions and pop them out, like, you know, and get them out of us and stretch us to the bit where we don't have those things anymore. But also, once you become at one with God, He wants to, in addition to that, stretch you further and further towards His feelings, towards His power. Right? He doesn't want you to just stay limited. I've got rid of all my negative stuff. He wants you to go beyond that in terms of your power of emotional expression, your power of passion, the power of all of these things, understanding, kindness, gift, giving, patience, the power of all of these things. Many of you at the moment would try the patience of a saint, as they say, right? But He wants you to get to the stage where you can be so patient with another person that they can take 50 years to get what you're saying. And you're still okay. That you still feel happy. He wants you to stretch so that you're capable of giving to somebody even when they abuse your gifts. He wants you to be capable of generosity that is like beyond even human abilities. That's what He wants for you, right? So the only way He's going to do that is by giving you a good stretch so the emotional capacity you have is expanding. And when you receive His love, that's what happens. The emotional capacity, the capacity you have of expansion continues to grow. And you will no longer have attitudes of, I can't cope with it. And you'll no longer feel like, it's too much now. And you'll no longer feel like, I've got to put it off. And you no longer will you feel those things. You'll feel like, if I got something to deal with, I deal with it now. Now, today. You know, I've got to cry about something, I cry about it now. You know, not because you're lacking in patience or compassion or kindness, but because you know that if I do it now, it's done by tomorrow. Right? My tomorrow will be better. Right? And I'll be a bit more stretched, and a bit more stretched, and a bit more capable, and a bit more capable. And I'll get to the stage where I believe that I am the pinnacle of His creation. That's what God wants for you to understand, that all of us, the soul is the best thing He's ever created. That's you. You're half of that. Right? And so the whole soul is the best thing He ever made. He is proud of His design. Right? Even when you exercise your free will in a very unloving direction, He still remains proud of the design. Because He knows He created all these laws to help you get out of that state. He knows you have the capacity to get out of the state. He believes in you. Right? And you'll feel all of that without seeing God.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
I have another question that's
Sure.
more around the guides and the guardians.
Sure.
Because I've always been a person that just does it by myself. And I was always jealous of, in Israel we don't have really spirits.
Talia, you've never done anything by yourself.
No, yeah, but I don't feel that that's the
I
thing.
know
I
you don't.
feel-
You've never done anything by yourself.
No.
Even a lot of your thoughts are not yours.
Yeah, but I know all that now.
Yeah.
And I'm starting a little bit to realize, that must be some guardian, spirit.
Yep.
But to connect more to
The same
same
thing
thing.
applies.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
For you, it's going to be, isn't it, growing faith in the emotional way and giving up your very
Dominant.
precious but very overbearing intellect. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, for many people, when they think of that, they sort of almost go into a sense of panic, like, whoa, what does that look like? And like, what's going on? And that indicates generally that there's a lot of suppressed emotion from childhood that's getting in the way of your willingness to be and feel things more emotionally.
Yeah. No, I feel happy. I'm excited. I don't feel like I've been on a path of opening up more emotionally over the last 2 years.
Yeah.
So I think
We're excited at the moment. And the reason why is like you're seeing a lot of benefits. But very soon, what's going to start happening is you're going to become less excited. because there will be certain addictions that you don't want to give up, that you're not excited about giving up. And then you'll feel less excited. And what are you going to do then? Is the real question, isn't it? So what a lot of people do who hear divine truth is they hear some divine truth, okay, get excited about it. They're excited for a period of time. Usually the excitement period lasts from anywhere from 6 months to 3 years or 5 years, and generally, depending on the person. And then after that, there's this hard period.
It's when the honeymoon is over.
The honeymoon's gone.
Winter.
Yeah, it's a hard period because there's all your favourite addictions that are all going to have to be confronted, and you won't want to hardly give up any of them, right? And it's not until you see the benefit of giving up all of them that actually changes, and usually that takes from year, say, 5 to year, say, 15. Usually. For the average person, that's pretty common.
That's so exciting.
Seems like I'm going to get it tomorrow.
That's my next 15 years of my life. But to be honest with you, compared to everlasting joy, what's 15 years of working through this tough stuff? Yeah. Also, I must say, sin is human responsibility, is a human responsibility. God didn't create it, we did. So God's going to expect you to awaken to it. And it's going to expect you to awaken to it through your own process. He can help people sharing truth with you and you coming to more terms with truth and you having desires, all helps. But at the end of the day, you are going to have to come face to face with your sin. Everybody has to do that. Now, how long that takes will depend on one thing. What's that?
Grief.
Is it humility or faith?
The will?
It's really humility, isn't it? It's going to depend a lot.
It's both, isn't it?
Because faith can't be developed without humility. You can't change a corrupt faith without being humble to the fact that you're corrupt. Right? It makes sense, doesn't it? So humility is the quality that you're going to need to develop very strongly inside yourself. So this is what I said in the 1st century. Unless you become like little children, you will not enter the kingdom of God. Right? Humility is the key, and that will allow you to accept a change of your faith, truth, which truth is the thing that confronts a corrupt faith. Right? So truth is the thing that's going to lead you to love as well. So unless you have some humility, and you develop humility as your primary goal, in terms of the primary principle you need to develop inside yourself emotionally, unless that occurs, then not much else can occur. And how long that takes is going to depend on you, which is appropriate if you think about it, because it's the exercise of your will as to how long that will take.
Because Jay, really, you could say it could take a year, up to 15 years, up to 50, up to...
We've seen some people 2,000, so it's how long it's going to take. It depends upon the level of humility you have.
And humility from God's standards is
far again. Remember?
I would love to do that as an exercise.
I would
Write
love
down
that,
humility.
Yeah.
What do we think it is?
Yeah. But can you could we do that as an exercise? Just a few words?
What's the time now?
4 o'clock.
Not tonight, we're not doing it. But maybe tomorrow morning,
What
yes.
if everyone does it as home?
What about you
us
do
right
it at
here,
home?
and then we can work together on the board first thing in the morning before we do mediumship,
Yeah.
and then Jesus and I'll add ours.
Yeah, sounds good.
Sound right? Yeah. Because we want to understand what humility is from God's perspective, not from ours. You know, oftentimes when you hear the word humility, in some languages, as you might know, in some languages, humility means being humbled and ridiculed. Right?
And that's not God's definition.
It's not God's definition of humility. So, you know, we need to find out what God's standard of humility actually is. And that's going to be very important for us developing it. Now, the sooner you can develop that quality, the faster the rest of your process is going to go. Yeah. Now, for some of us, we've been injured in certain different ways that it's going to take longer. So it's not a competition. It's just about dealing with whatever stops me from being humble. Right? For some of us, it might be some major things. Other times, it can just be one thing that stops you, from being humble. But if you focus on developing it, then you'll be able to develop it. And that will aid you in your development of every other quality. Because also remember, humility allows you to hear God through the conscience. If you're not humble, you won't be able to hear God through the conscience. Right? So it's going to help you in lots of ways. And this is the interesting thing that I want to say in closing tonight. Dealing with the principle is the fastest way to make progress. Anything else is going to be slower. Dealing with the principle is the very fastest way you can do it. It is also the most economical. Right? In the sense that for the effort you put into it, you'll get the most gains. So remember, economy is I put a bit of effort in and I go a long way. Whereas putting lots of effort in and you only get a little way. So when you start dealing with your physical, sexual, emotional addictions, often many of you are putting a lot of effort in and getting just, and then you go, it's so tiring doing that, right? And the reason why it's so tiring is because it's not dealing with the spiritual principles, right? So if we focus on the principles, our progress, we can put effort in, and that progress will take us a long direction. And not only with that, the beauty of dealing with principles is that they're permanent. Once you understand them, they will remain with you for the rest of your existence, not just on earth, but also spirit world and soul union and everything. Whereas when you just try to focus on these things, they will come and go in your life. Physical things, well, on earth and in the spirit world, there's a physical body and then a spirit body which still feels physical to the spirit. And, if you deal with just the problems in that, then the spiritual problems, which are causing many of these other problems, won't go away. So you keep having to deal with it over and over again. And this is why people have to go I'm going to try to cure a certain disease or something, and then I've got to do this every day for the rest of my life. That's because the spiritual principle is not being addressed. For me, I've had to deal with a lot of things all my life, like bowel problems all my life. Just recently, I dealt with a spiritual principle with regard to love of self, so it's about love. And a lot of my bowel problems disappear. I'm eating stuff and go, what's going on? And it's like, before I'd be constipated for a week with that. I've had part of my bowel removed when I was 2. I have a lot of problems with my bowel for a long period of time, all coming from spirit, a lot of spirit stuff. Once I started working through that, which started in Belgium, on this trip, all of a sudden big changes. Yeah? And this is the thing, you work on the spiritual principles. In this case, it was a love of self principle. And, right?
Same goes with emotion, doesn't it? You can have an instance in your life where you deal with a single grief. You're forced into it through life or something happened. You deal with a single grief. You have a good cry, you feel like, that benefited me. That was good. But if I change my spiritual beliefs about humility,
about emotion,
then all grief will leave me easier. It will happen more seamlessly. I won't have to work to get to it as much. It'll be a part of my everyday life, emotion. And I won't feel fear or shame or worry.
And I want it. Not go, oh, not again, not again. I want that, because I know it's going to benefit me. So, and we will also want truth, instead of going, oh, not another truth, oh, isn't it terrible? Oh, look at what I got first now. Oh, why did that person tell that truth to me? Oh, no. Instead of doing all that, we go, I want another truth. I want, you know what I mean? Your desires will change markedly once you understand and start to grasp principles in your own heart. Your desires change greatly. So that's why we would like to, what we focus on. So maybe tomorrow what we should do is we first have the conversation about humility.
So God's standard
So
of
God's
humility.
standard of humility, the principle associated with humility, what are they? And then we might have a chat with some spirits to help them as well about those principles that we've discussed. And you'll learn some things through that process as well. Because we don't want to miss, there's quite a lot of spirits here today, and particularly this afternoon conversation, and we would like to help them as much as we want to help you. Make sense? Good.
Thank you.
That's what we'll
Thanks,
do tomorrow.
everyone. No, just have a good evening. Thanks for your participation. It was lovely. Thanks for your donations, everyone who donated.
We've already paid for all of our expenses in
Yeah,
Audi.
it's a lovely gift. So, yeah, thank you very much for your generosity in that
Yeah.
regard. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see you here at 11 tomorrow.
Now